Few places in central Pennsylvania looked as postcard perfect as Meadowbrook Springs. This cozy subdivision just outside Harrisburg was composed of wide, curving streets lined by maple and birch trees, each with a neat row of single-family homes sporting immaculate lawns. A mix of families and retirees inhabited the subdivision, drawn to the calm atmosphere. On weekend mornings, the scents of fresh coffee and newly mowed grass mingled in the breeze, while children's laughter echoed from yards where sprinklers arced across the green. Beneath that serene surface, though, tensions had steadily risen, rooted in the precincts of the local homeowners association. For an unprepared newcomer, it was easy to assume that the HOA's main job was to ensure consistent fence paint colors and set guidelines about mailbox height. However, the people who actually lived there knew better. The real architect of trouble was Winifred Gilmore, widely and derisively known by neighbors as Karen. Winifred was in her early 50s, with a signature hairstyle that resembled a short, stiff bob. A pair of stylish, frameless glasses perched on her nose, through which she peered with a perpetual air of suspicion. She and her husband had moved in about 3 years prior. Winifred, unburdened by a day job and possessing a keen appetite for policing other people's business, jumped at the chance to serve as the HOA's compliance director. In practice, she interpreted her role as a near-absolute mandate to impose her personal taste and rules upon the entire subdivision. Her official-sounding emails dripped with a condescending tone, reminding residents of voluntary obligations that somehow felt mandatory, such as no holiday lights past January 2nd, hedges must be trimmed to precisely 3 feet, and shared corridors must be kept free of personal items. Most neighbors tried to ignore her as best they could, rolling their eyes at her pedantic demands. Yet, her relentless presence proved nearly impossible to escape. She took daily walks around the neighborhood, phone in hand, snapping photos of any perceived violation: a flower bed grown too wide, a hammock post that seemed unstable, or a child's chalk drawing on the sidewalk, which she claimed was visual clutter. The more she meddled, the more frustration simmered among those who just wanted to live peacefully. A prime example was John Walters, a kind-hearted widower in his late 70s who had recently moved to Meadowbrook Springs to be closer to his adult daughter's family. John had fragile health. He suffered from COPD and required near-constant oxygen therapy. But the appealing promise of a quiet suburban life, plus the chance to be near his grandchildren, had drawn him to the neighborhood. John's unit was at the end of a 1-story row of connected patio homes, each with separate entrances but shared walkways. Because he needed an oxygen machine running at all times, a power cable, protected by a thick rubber mat, extended across a portion of the common hallway from his interior bedroom to a dedicated electrical outlet. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it allowed him a more stable power connection than the older outlets in his bedroom. His family had tried to upgrade the wiring in his unit, but the process was bogged down by the HOA's strict remodeling requirements. When Karen noticed this arrangement, a single heavy-duty extension cord crossing the corridor, her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. Despite the fact that John's daughter had taped down the cord and covered it with a neon yellow mat for safety, Karen repeatedly complained about trip hazards in shared spaces. She sent him formal warnings, citing obscure HOA bylaws about personal property not intruding upon communal areas. Over time, John tried to comply as best he could, even rearranging his bedroom to use other outlets. But occasionally, when the older wiring in that section of the house overloaded, his oxygen machine tripped the breaker in his unit. Then, out of necessity, he would revert to using the corridor's more robust outlet, placing the rubber mat over the cord to keep neighbors from tripping. His respectful disclaimers and bright caution signage apparently weren't enough for Karen, who viewed it as a direct affront to the perfect order she wanted to enforce. So far, she had only bombarded John with threatening emails and phone calls. But that was about to change, and in a shocking, potentially life-threatening way. John Walters took slow, measured breaths through the tubing connected to the small oxygen machine at his bedside. The quiet whir had become a constant companion, so much so that he rarely noticed the sound anymore. Though not incapacitated, he couldn't walk more than a few steps without feeling short of breath, particularly in the humid Pennsylvanian summers. His doctors had urged him to maintain an oxygen supply whenever possible. John's move to Meadowbrook Springs was driven by one overarching desire: spending more time with his daughter, Elaine, and his two grandchildren, Abby and Michael. Elaine lived just 10 minutes away, and every Tuesday and Thursday she dropped by with groceries or a pre-cooked meal, fussing over him with that loving exasperation unique to adult children caring for aging parents. "Dad, you sure the unit's power is stable?" Elaine asked one afternoon, glancing at the extension cord that ran from John's bedroom and across the short corridor to the more reliable outlet. "I hate seeing you rely on that external breaker. Maybe we can push for a full rewiring of your place, or at least get a generator installed." He gave a reassuring smile. "I've requested the rewiring permit, honey, but the HOA hasn't approved it yet. Something about needing additional inspections. This is only temporary. The main bedroom outlets keep shorting out when the AC kicks in. At least this one out here is on a different circuit." Elaine sighed, trying not to feel anger toward the snail's pace of HOA processes. "I'll keep pressing them. Meanwhile, can I do anything to make it safer? Karen's been complaining about it, right?" He chuckled drily. "When isn't she complaining? I did everything the board recommended. Bright caution tape, the rubber runner mat, a sign that says, 'Oxygen in use. Please do not unplug.' I truly don't want trouble. But for me, having a stable power supply isn't optional." Elaine squeezed his hand. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll figure this out." John tried to stay optimistic. The oxygen machine was small but powerful, manufactured to remain on for long stretches without overheating. Yet, occasionally, storms or brief blackouts reminded him just how vulnerable he was to losing that essential lifeline. His doctor had recommended looking into a backup generator or battery system, but John hesitated, uncertain how easily the HOA would sign off on such an installation. Despite these concerns, John cherished the simpler joys: reading a story to his grandchildren on his recliner, sipping iced tea on his tiny screened-in porch, and taking slow, short walks among the neighborhood's flowering crabapple trees. He tried to keep Karen's hostility from overshadowing these positives. But the day was coming when she would push too far, and John's entire well-being would be jeopardized in the process. Karen's frustration with John's extension cord escalated rapidly once she noticed other neighbors quietly sympathizing with him. She thrived on compliance and thrived even more on the sense of power derived from citing rules. Yet, she discovered that many residents regarded John's situation as an understandable exception. He needs that oxygen to breathe. Undeterred, Karen pored over the Meadowbrook Springs bylaws, seeking any obscure clause that might ban the use of such cords in common spaces, no matter the reason. Eventually, she landed on a passage referencing, "No personal electrical devices shall extend into or across shared corridors without prior approval." It was ambiguous, but enough for her to latch onto. She decided, in her typical style, to interpret it strictly. In the next HOA meeting, held in the local library's conference room, Karen brought up the matter as an urgent issue. Seated around a long rectangular table, the board members listened while Karen, wearing a crisp beige blazer, read from her printed notes. Item number 4. Non-compliant extension cord usage in the Building C corridor, specifically at Unit number 23, belonging to one John Walters. This is a blatant violation. Residents have complained of potential trip hazards, aesthetic damage, and risk of electrical overload. I propose immediate measures to remove the cord from the hallway. Some board members, like the mild-mannered treasurer, Peter Long, looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. Ms. Gilmore, we are aware Mr. Walters uses that cord for his oxygen machine. It's not as if it's a trivial matter. Are we sure we can't find a different solution? Maybe expedite the rewiring permit." Karen pursed her lips in disapproval. Expediting rewiring is beyond our budgeted scope, and it sets a precedent that any resident can circumvent rules by citing personal needs. We must keep the corridor clear and adhere to the bylaws. If Mr. Walters has a medical requirement, that is not the HOA's problem to solve. A hush fell. Another board member, Linda Perez, frowned. "He does have a medical requirement, though? Isn't it unkind, and possibly dangerous, for us to remove his power supply for oxygen?" Karen raised her eyebrows, tone biting. "Dangerous or not, the rules are the rules. We can't have cords lying about. If he's truly so ill, Maybe he should consider an assisted living facility. Our job is to protect the aesthetics and safety of the majority. Though the board did not wholly agree, Karen's vehement stance and her constant pressure made them reluctant to speak out. Over the following weeks, she took it upon herself to send repeated, final warning letters to John's door, each more threatening than the last. She demanded that he cease running any cord across the corridor without explicit permission she had no intention of granting. Word spread among the neighbors that Karen was harassing John over something essential for his survival. Many rallied behind him, quietly offering emotional support. Charlene Watson, a feisty retiree 2 doors down, openly confronted Karen in the hallway one morning. "This is inhumane. That man needs oxygen. For heaven's sake, show some compassion." But Karen just responded with a cold stare, repeating her mantra about enforcing the rules for the good of all. Behind that rigid facade lurked a growing anger. Karen loathed feeling undermined, especially by those who viewed her as heartless. She resolved to escalate further, determined to prove that the corridor belonged to the HOA, not to this ailing man's cords. She could have tried rational compromise, finding an alternate route, or pushing the rewiring to the top of the board's agenda. Instead, she opted for a reckless course that would place John's very life at risk. Late one summer night, Karen paced her living room, eyeing the digital clock as it approached midnight. Her husband was out of town on business, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the central air. She sipped from a mug of herbal tea, her thoughts circling around John Walters like a vulture. His repeated noncompliance with her demands had become an obsession, a constant reminder that she, the so-called compliance director, was losing face in her own kingdom. She thought of the older man's extension cord, taped down under that glaring yellow runner in the corridor. It was brazenly defying her. He had not removed it, no matter how many letters she posted. Anger welled within her, fed by her sense of indignation and a twisted logic. He's disregarding the rules. He's forcing me into this. Moving to her desk, she opened a drawer and pulled out the official key to the Building C utility closet. She had insisted on acquiring it shortly after becoming compliance director, rationalizing that she needed quick access to breakers in case of emergency. In truth, she coveted control over even the building's electricity. Could she simply shut off the power to John's external outlet, forcing him to remove the cord? She found the idea both thrilling and frightening. Certainly, if the power was cut, John might be compelled to remove the cable. But a small, nagging voice in her head reminded her, this man needs oxygen. What if the machine fails? She brushed the thought aside. He must have a backup. If he's so sick, he should be prepared. She reasoned that it would only be a temporary measure, enough to demonstrate that the HOA was serious and to push him to either solve his wiring issues or leave. She convinced herself it wouldn't be that big of a deal. After all, the extension cord was technically unauthorized. Seizing her phone, she typed a text message to the board's group chat, though she didn't plan to send it yet. It read, FYI, external hallway outlet in Building C is out of service due to code concerns. She'd send it after the deed was done, presenting it as a sudden, necessary shutoff. No mention of John's oxygen. No mention of a midnight sabotage. She'd let them assume the wiring was faulty. Her hand hovered over the phone, heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. She stuffed the phone into her blazer pocket and grabbed the utility closet key. Within minutes, she was silently letting herself out of her home, crossing the darkened courtyard to Building C. A single streetlight illuminated the walkway. She prayed no one would see her at this hour, especially not John's neighbor, Charlene, who was known to stay up late. Easing open the utility closet door, she flicked on her phone's flashlight to locate the correct breaker label. One read, hallway outlet. She gripped it, hesitating a second. Is this too far? The question floated through her mind. But in that instant, her thirst for compliance overshadowed better judgment. With one firm click, she flipped the breaker off. She exhaled in a rush, almost dizzy with the surge of power she felt. That's done. She'd wait a moment, maybe peek around the corner to confirm the extension cord's machine had powered down. Then she'd retreat, claiming ignorance if asked. If John complained, she'd blame faulty wiring. If neighbors got upset, she'd say the corridor was not a personal extension of his living space. But the ramifications of that switch flip would ripple far beyond Karen's petty notion of teaching a lesson. Within minutes, the oxygen machine in John's bedroom beeped a warning as it lost power, threatening the very breath he needed to survive. In his modest bedroom, John Walters had drifted into a fitful sleep. The oxygen machine, softly humming, was perched atop a sturdy end table near the window. The tube connecting it to John's nasal cannula snaked across the pillow. At 12:07 a.m., the machine made a sharp beep. The power indicator switched to blinking red. For a moment, John didn't stir. Then a second beep shrilled, accompanied by a faint whir of an internal fan struggling to maintain flow without electricity. John's eyes snapped open. He sensed a change in the airflow almost immediately, a shallowness that made his chest tighten. He fumbled for the machine's control panel. The display flickered, then went dark. "No, no," he muttered, panic blooming. He pressed the power button to no avail. The tube expelled only a weak whisper of air. The corridor outlet that had provided stable current was now dead. He tried to stand, but dizziness seized him, forcing him to sit on the bed. He coughed, gasping for breath. Elaine had insisted on leaving a portable oxygen tank as a backup, stored in the closet, but on this night, it was only partially filled. Still, it might help. Summoning what little energy he had, he shuffled to the closet and retrieved the tank, hooking the tubing to it. He turned the valve, relief flooding him as oxygen hissed through. However, he knew it could last only so long, maybe a few hours at most. And if he needed to call for help? The phone in the living room felt a million miles away. Outside, in the hallway, Karen lingered for just a moment, then hurried away, never hearing the beeps of alarm from behind John's closed door. She patted her phone, considering whether to send her text message to the board now or in the morning. In the end, she decided to wait. She wanted a coherent explanation, maybe a quick staged inspection the next day to discover the outlet's problem. Satisfied, she slipped back home and prepared for bed, ignoring the uncomfortable twinge in her gut. Meanwhile, John, trembling with fear, tried to remain calm. He managed to shuffle into the living room to grab his cordless phone, but just as he picked it up, another wave of dizziness hit. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered across the floor. He sank into an armchair, struggling to keep the cannula in place, short breaths leaving him lightheaded. Maybe I should call 911, he thought, but the phone was out of reach. He tried to stand, his vision blurred, everything swirling. At that moment, across the courtyard, Charlene Watson was reading a late-night mystery novel at her kitchen table. She often looked out her window, enjoying the quiet hush of the small hours. By sheer chance, she spotted something odd through the glass. John's silhouette, visible in his lit living room window, tottering on his feet. He looked distressed, his movements shaky. Concern spiked in her chest. Grabbing her keys and phone, Charlene rushed outside, crossing the small yard to John's side door. She knocked loudly. No immediate answer. Fearing the worst, she turned the doorknob. Miraculously, it wasn't locked. Inside, she found John slumped in the armchair, the portable tank hissing faintly, his face ashen. "John," she cried. "What happened?" He parted his lips, trying to speak, gesturing toward the corridor. Summoning her wits, Charlene placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay calm. I'm calling 911. She dialed the number and quickly relayed his condition. As she waited, she surveyed the extension cord trailing from the oxygen machine. She walked into the corridor, verifying that the mat was still in place. She tried the hallway outlet, dead. Then she recalled Karen's constant demands. Could she possibly have? Within minutes, paramedics arrived. They stabilized John, placing him on their portable oxygen supply and monitoring his vitals. The lead paramedic told Charlene, "He seems to be in stable condition now, but the abrupt loss of oxygen supply triggered a respiratory crisis." They recommended taking John to the hospital for observation, ensuring there were no complications like hypoxia-induced arrhythmias. As the ambulance pulled away, a small group of neighbors emerged. Lights flicked on in windows. Word spread quickly. Horrified whispers filled the night air when they learned the hallway outlet had lost power, apparently cut off. And though no one had definitive proof yet, many cast suspicious looks at Karen's home. Charlene clenched her fists, vowing to expose the truth and protect John. The entire community braced for an uproar, one that Karen would not escape unscathed. When the sun rose over Meadowbrook Springs, the air was alive with gossip and anxiety. People traded phone calls, text messages, and quick porch discussions about John's health scare. Charlene Watson, who'd accompanied him to the hospital, reported that he was doing better, though the doctors planned to keep him for a day or two to ensure full stability. Meanwhile, the question on everyone's lips: who turned off the corridor outlet's power? As if on cue, Karen woke early to check the building's utility closet, intending to discover the issue. She wore her usual crisp attire, though tension lined her face. The moment she stepped outside, she sensed the wary stares of neighbors peering from windows and doorways. "Mrs. Gilmore," called a voice. She turned to see Peter Long, the board treasurer, approaching with a stern expression. "We heard about Mr. Walter's oxygen machine losing power last night. The paramedics said the hallway circuit was shut off. Do you know anything about that?" Feigning ignorance, Karen adjusted her glasses. "I'm just going to investigate. Possibly a breaker tripped overnight." Peter's gaze hardened. A breaker doesn't just flip off on its own, especially not that specific one. The paramedics found it in the off position. Some of the neighbors think. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They suspect you did it, considering your repeated complaints about John's extension cord." Karen bristled with indignation. "That's absurd. I'd never do something so reckless." She tried to maintain a calm facade, but a nervous tremor in her voice hinted otherwise. "Anyway, I'm heading to the utility closet right now. We'll see if it's simply a mechanical failure." Peter followed her, arms folded. A few other neighbors, including Linda Perez and Charlene Watson, recently back from the hospital, gathered near the corridor to witness the inspection. Karen unlocked the closet, pointedly flipping the breaker back on as if discovering it herself. She tested the corridor's outlet with a small lamp. Light flooded the bulb. "See? I've turned it back on. Looks like it was off for some reason. Maybe a surge." Charlene glared. "We had no thunderstorms last night. No known surges. That breaker doesn't just flip on its own." She leaned closer, her voice low and fierce. "Admit it. You shut it off because you hate that extension cord. Because you hate that John needs something from the shared area." Karen's jaw tightened. "Stop making baseless accusations. Anyone could have accessed this closet." Linda Perez piped up, her voice trembling with anger. "Actually, Mrs. Gilmore, you're the only one with the official key, aside from the maintenance staff who were all off duty last night. So it's not exactly anyone." A tense silence followed. Karen's cheeks flamed. She opened her mouth to retort, but the crowd's expressions told her they weren't buying any excuses. Charlene brandished her phone. "I might not have camera footage, but if the cops or the HOA board investigate, I guarantee your name will come up." This was a matter of life and death. At the mention of the police, Karen stiffened. "I had no idea about any medical crisis," she said, a bit too quickly. "I only wanted the cord removed for safety in the corridor. If we blame me for every little issue that arises." "Little issue?" Charlene nearly shouted. "John could have died." Peter Long shook his head, stepping in to diffuse the tension. "Let's remain calm. The bottom line is, John's in the hospital. We must ensure this never happens again." He looked pointedly at Karen. "The board will meet first thing tomorrow for an emergency session to discuss your role in this. I strongly suggest you prepare an explanation, or an apology." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she forced a stiff nod. As the crowd dispersed, anxious whispers and cold glares followed her every step. For once, her iron grip over the community seemed to be slipping away, replaced by condemnation and disbelief. And this time, she thought with a pang of fear, I might not be able to spin the story in my favor. That evening, a small gathering took place in Charlene Watson's living room, an informal strategy session of concerned neighbors. The worn floral couch and coffee table groaned under the weight of donated snacks, cookies, fruit plates, and thermoses of coffee. The participants included Linda Perez, Peter Long, and a few younger, tech-savvy residents such as Mark Bailey, an electrical engineer, and Anna Lee, a software developer. Their shared goal: find a way to ensure John's oxygen machine would never again be at the mercy of a meddling neighbor or a flimsy circuit. Charlene, seated at the head of the couch like a general leading her troops, summarized the predicament. "We can't rely on the corridor outlet. We can't trust Karen not to sabotage it again. Even if the board fires her from the compliance role, who's to say she won't pull another stunt? Meanwhile, John can't simply do without oxygen. Mark nodded. We could accelerate the rewiring of John's unit. But the HOA's bureaucracy, plus local permitting, might take weeks. Even if the board is motivated, we're dealing with contractors' schedules and a ton of red tape. John needs a solution now. Anna, nibbling a cookie, tapped her phone thoughtfully. Have you folks considered a solar backup battery system? We did something similar for my grandparents' cabin off-grid. A small rooftop solar panel array that charges a battery bank, enough to power essential devices in case of an outage. In John's case, it could be dedicated to his oxygen machine. Linda's eyes lit up. Would that be feasible here, within the rules? The HOA is usually strict about external additions. But maybe we can argue it's a necessary medical accommodation. It's more than feasible, Mark chimed in. Modern panels and lithium battery setups can be quite compact. We can place them discreetly on his back patio roof or near a window. The system would run his oxygen machine independently from the building's main lines. And if it's considered a medical accommodation, the HOA might have no grounds to deny it under the Americans with Disabilities Act or Fair Housing Guidelines. Enthusiasm rippled through the group. The idea of giving John a self-sustaining power source, free from Karen's interference, galvanized them. Charlene set her teacup down. Let's do it. We'll crowdfund if necessary. I know half the neighborhood would chip in after this fiasco. We'll contact a reputable solar contractor or see if Mark can help do some of it himself. I'm sure John's family will be on board. They spent the next hour drafting an action plan. Mark volunteered to handle the technical specs, sizing the solar panels, battery capacity, and ensuring the system could run the oxygen machine, plus maybe some lights. Anna would coordinate an online fundraiser among neighbors, promising transparency for every dollar spent. Linda and Peter would speak with the board, urging them to expedite approval on humanitarian grounds. And Charlene would keep John's daughter, Elaine, updated on every step. By the end of the night, excitement and determination pulsed through the group. Instead of wallowing in anger over Karen's sabotage, they'd transformed that outrage into constructive action, a literal lifeline for John that no petty individual could cut off again. As they parted ways under the glow of porch lights, each felt a renewed sense of community, buoyed by the knowledge that compassion could triumph over cruelty. The next morning, while Karen prepared nervously for the emergency HOA meeting, the neighbors were already buzzing about the solar project. Word traveled swiftly, and many residents who had felt powerless against Karen's pettiness seized this chance to push back, not through aggression, but through an act of communal kindness. Elaine, John's daughter, was particularly moved when Charlene phoned her with the plan. That's incredible, Elaine said, voice trembling with emotion. Dad's always been so proud, not wanting to impose on anyone. But he needs this. Thank you, Charlene. Meanwhile, the crowdfunding page Anna set up quietly gathered donations from across Meadowbrook Springs. People who had never even spoken to John pitched in $20, $50, or even $100, outraged by the notion that someone would cut off a vulnerable man's oxygen supply. In less than 24 hours, the total soared past the initial goal, enough to purchase a battery, solar panels, and pay for partial installation. Mark was astounded. I knew folks were upset at Karen, but this is beyond my expectations, he remarked to Anna. That same day, the HOA board convened in the small community hall for the emergency session. Karen arrived in subdued attire, lacking her usual confident swagger. The other board members wore stern expressions. Most had come to realize how close John came to tragedy. Linda Perez and Peter Long recounted the events, while Charlene Watson presented the paramedics' report indicating John's respiratory crisis due to abrupt power loss. When confronted, Karen repeated her feeble defense. The breaker must have malfunctioned. I had no idea he was relying on that cord overnight. This time, though, the board was less inclined to swallow her excuses. Their patience eroded by the near-fatal consequences, they voted to suspend Karen from her compliance role, pending a formal investigation. She'd lose her special privileges, like the utility closet key, and could be further penalized if an inquiry confirmed willful sabotage. Karen's face twisted with a mixture of fury and shame as she listened to the verdict. But the board wasn't finished. Linda revealed the neighbor's plan for a solar backup system at John's residence. explaining that the group would submit a formal request under ADA guidelines for a reasonable accommodation. Karen tried to object, claiming that solar panels might clash with the visual harmony of the subdivision. However, the board was in no mood to hear it. Given the life-threatening incident, Linda said sharply, "We're inclined to expedite approval. Mr. Walter's situation is not up for debate. This is a necessary medical measure." One unexpected twist emerged, though. Philip Abrams, a board member who usually sided with Karen, cleared his throat. "I've been reading up on the future of solar energy. Many HOAs across the country are slowly embracing it to reduce carbon footprint. Maybe this is an opportunity for Meadowbrook Springs to step into the modern era. We could set guidelines for tasteful panel installations, but we shouldn't block them altogether." The board considered this, and in a moment that might have been unimaginable just days earlier, they agreed to draft solar-friendly guidelines that would start with John's system as a pilot project. Linda smiled. So, ironically, Karen's attempt to micromanage has led to a bigger conversation about updated energy solutions. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. By day's end, Karen had lost her compliance director position. Though she technically remained a homeowner in the neighborhood, her influence waned significantly. Meanwhile, the neighbors forged ahead with the new plan, buoyed by an unlikely sense of progress. For John, who was still resting in the hospital, the community's abrupt shift towards solar might become the key to protecting his fragile health from further sabotage or disasters. A week passed in a blur. John was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to avoid any further interruptions to his oxygen supply. Elaine, determined to watch over him, extended her daily visits and began moving some of his belongings around to create more space for the upcoming solar battery equipment. Meanwhile, Mark Bailey worked tirelessly to source the components. Through a friend who owned a local renewable energy shop, he secured a set of sleek black solar panels and a high-capacity lithium battery system at a discounted rate. The battery, about the size of a large suitcase, would store enough energy to keep John's oxygen machine powered for days if needed. On the chosen installation morning, a mild, sunny Saturday, neighbors converged at John's unit with a sense of excitement that overshadowed Karen's lingering negativity. They carried tools, ladders, boxes of cables, and an air of camaraderie. Even those who had never installed a light bulb offered to hand screws and fetch water bottles for the more experienced volunteers. Elaine guided them through John's small patio gate. "He's inside, resting, but he wants to watch from the window," she told the group. Indeed, John sat in his recliner, nasal cannula in place, smiling weakly each time he spotted a familiar face pass by. Despite his recent scare, gratitude radiated from him. Mark and a few helpers climbed onto the low-slope roof above the patio, carefully affixing mounting brackets for the solar panels. Another team, led by Anna Lee, ran wires from the panels down to the battery unit that would be housed in a corner of John's living room, an arrangement that the HOA now allowed as a medical accommodation. Everyone worked with a mixture of caution and determination, not minding the sweat and occasional minor snags. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen stood at her front window, peering through a slit in the curtains. Her expression was unreadable, though frustration was evident in the tense line of her mouth. She could see the clusters of neighbors cooperating in a display of unity that only served to highlight her isolation. She remembered how she once reveled in the role of rule enforcer, forcing them to abide by her standards. Now, they were forging new policies without her, celebrating a project she had tried to prevent. By late afternoon, the system was nearly complete. Mark tested the connections, ensuring the battery was charging properly. He flicked a switch, and a small digital screen lit up, displaying the incoming wattage from the bright summer sun. Cheers rose from the assembled group as they realized it worked. John's oxygen machine could be plugged in right then, operating fully on solar power. Elaine, tears in her eyes, gave Mark and Anna each a tight hug. "You've given Dad a peace of mind he's never had before. I can't thank you enough." "Don't thank us alone," Anna said gently, gesturing to the crowd of neighbors. Everyone pitched in. It was a real team effort. Charlene, wiping perspiration from her brow, turned to Linda Perez. "Any sign of Karen? I know she's been lurking. This must infuriate her." Linda shrugged, a small, wry smile tugging at her lips. "She hasn't come out to cause trouble, at least. Maybe she's realized she's lost this battle. In truth, Karen was deep in turmoil. Part of her longed to sabotage the project, to claim it violated some minor aesthetic rule. But her formal power was gone, and the rest of the board would never support her. Even if she tried, she'd face legal ramifications, especially given that John's system was now officially labeled a medical accommodation. As the sun dipped low, casting warm orange light across the roofs, the new solar array glinted softly. John's oxygen machine purred steadily, no cord crossing the hallway, no reliance on the corridor outlet. In a single day, the neighbors had transformed his vulnerability into a symbol of the community's capacity for empathy and innovation. A month later, Meadowbrook Springs glowed with a fresh sense of solidarity. The success of John's solar backup system had spurred conversations throughout the neighborhood. Some residents wondered if they, too, could install smaller panels to reduce electric bills or provide backup power during storms. The HOA board, newly mindful of the benefits, began drafting more progressive guidelines that allowed for tasteful solar installations, so long as they conformed to basic aesthetic standards. A small but pivotal change. It hinted that the community was ready to move beyond old-fashioned policies. As for John Walters, his days were brighter. Thanks to the battery and panels installed outside his bedroom window, he no longer panicked at the thought of power outages or meddling neighbors flipping breakers out of spite. He still needed his portable oxygen tank if he wanted to walk outdoors, but inside his home, the machine hummed steadily, fully independent of the building's corridor outlet. Elaine visited regularly, each time marveling at the simple digital display on the battery unit. "It's at 85% charged, Dad. Even with a cloudy morning, we've got plenty of juice." He'd grin, tapping the device affectionately. "I owe all this to the neighborhood, honey. I never imagined folks would rally around me like they did." His gratitude found ways to express itself. When he felt well enough, he baked a batch of oatmeal cookies or apple pie, leaving them on the neighbors' doorsteps with handwritten thank you notes. He also began greeting passersby from his porch, beaming whenever he saw the volunteers who had once scaled his roof to install the panels. The near tragedy had forged new friendships that transcended age and background. Karen, on the other hand, retreated further into isolation. The board's investigation ultimately concluded that someone had intentionally turned off the breaker, and though Karen refused to confess outright, the circumstantial evidence was damning. She was officially stripped of all HOA roles. Rumors abounded that she might sell her house soon and move elsewhere, frustrated by a community that no longer tolerated her extremes. One crisp Saturday morning, the neighborhood decided to organize a small community innovation day, celebrating the new stance on solar energy. A handful of local vendors set up booths in the clubhouse parking lot, offering information on environmentally friendly upgrades. Mark Bailey gave a short presentation, explaining how John's system worked, while Anna Lee fielded questions about cost-sharing and technology. Linda Perez addressed the crowd, extolling the importance of neighborly compassion. Toward the end, Elaine gently helped John step onto a small platform so he could speak. Though short of breath, he managed a warm, shaky voice that carried well in the quiet hush. "I just want to say thank you, all of you. I came here hoping for a peaceful retirement, to be near my family. I never expected to face a threat to my oxygen. But out of that danger came something beautiful, a system that keeps me safe, built by neighbors who cared. You gave me more than electricity. You gave me faith in community." Applause thundered, and a few tears were shed. Even the children clapped, grasping the essence of the story. John's words solidified the sense that Meadowbrook Springs had crossed a threshold, learning that rules without empathy can turn oppressive, and that genuine kindness can transform a crisis into opportunity. As the event wound down, Karen lingered on the periphery, half hidden behind a row of parked cars. No one approached her, and she stood there only for a few minutes, scowling at the celebration. Eventually, she turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, leaving behind the echoes of gratitude and excitement. In the weeks that followed, new solar applications trickled in. Neighbors found themselves exchanging tips on best panel brands or local contractors. Some even joked that one day, Meadowbrook Springs might become an unofficial green community, a far cry from the days when the most pressing rule was the color of one's mailbox. For John, each sunrise now felt like a gentle affirmation, Bright rays poured onto the panels, funneling energy into the battery, fueling the machine that delivered precious air into his lungs. He kept a small photograph of his late wife beside the battery display, as if to say, "Look at me. I'm safe here, thanks to good people." And that was the happy ending. A once contentious neighborhood awakened to its own empathy, bridging the gap between petty rule enforcement and genuine human need. Karen's reign of intimidation was cut short by her own cruelty, revealing the deeply rooted kindness she had tried to suppress. And through it all, John Walters, who needed oxygen to survive, ended up teaching Meadowbrook Springs how to truly breathe as a community.